Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Excellent. Awesome. All right. So what we're doing in here is we're going to learn about leadership transitions. This is some important stuff. So, leading you today, we have Ben Zalisko, who started the groups at Elmhurst College and the University of Chicago. He's currently working on his PhD in chemistry at University of Chicago, and is a humanist chaplain at Elmhurst. Is that correct?
Starting this fall.
Starting this fall.
Yeah.
Here you go. I'm going to let him take it.
Thank you very much. So I'm hoping this is one of the more practical talks. A little less on the sexy and the inspiring, a little more on the you can use it maybe immediately, or maybe when you come to those transition times in the year, you can rewatch the video, take some notes, and take some of my advice. So it was just introduced. These are a lot of the fun people that I miss like crazy cakes from my old SSAs at Elmhurst College and University of Chicago, and me looking much younger and with much crazier, longer hair. I'm finishing up my PhD at U of C, and I'm very excited about starting as a secular co-chaplain at my alma mater. You see me later this weekend, please come up and talk to me about this. I'd love to get any kind of input. It's not very usual that they hire a biochemist to be a chaplain. So any kind of input and advice you'd have would be great. But all this is to say that I'm not an expert in transitions. I'm not an expert in anything legal or any elections or politics. My expertise here is really that I've just done this a lot. I was also in student government, did a lot of transitions. I've done it at multiple universities, and all in the context of student organizations. And I think that's really important. Student organizations have a really unique challenge when compared to other nonprofit organizations. And they tend to be inherently turbulent and dynamic and ever-changing. And that's not just because their members tend to be very high energy and relatively inexperienced, but just because their members and their officers have an expiration date. It's really not possible to have the elder statesman that keeps a sense of history, keeps a sense of tradition, and that you have a constant turnover of members and officers. And so these organizations don't have to work very hard to stay fresh. They don't have to work very hard to get new ideas. What they do have to work very hard at is to maintain institutional memory. Now, why is that important? The most obvious is not to reinvent the wheel. If your organizations keep making the same mistakes, if they keep having to learn from experience how to PR an event, how to handle finances, they're not running as efficiently as they could if they were to benefit from the mistakes and successes of their predecessors. Every organization is going to need to maintain records, hardware, talking t-shirts, books, and obviously documents. One of the more difficult ones is maintaining relationships. You have faculty, staff, community members, staff members from the National SSA, whose relationships with your organization are going to far outlast any of the students or officers. So you not only have to hand off documents, you have to hand off friendships. And that's very, very important. You need to maintain your public image, both within the university and outside the university. If you're known for something good you're doing every year, you want to keep doing that. You want to maintain a good public image, while allowing you can reinvent yourself if you want to. And stability for its own sake, I think, is very valuable. I know most of you have as one of your main goals to create a safe space for secular students. And having a reputation and actually being a very stable and reliable organization really lets people come out of the woodwork and really makes them feel safe. And it's really important to that aim. So, question for all of you. You're an officer. Actually, let me ask first. Any officers? How many of you are officers in your local SSA? Okay, most of you. How many of you are newly elected just this spring? Newly elected? Awesome. Okay, so especially for you, but for all of you, when should you start preparing your transition to the next person? Sort of like asking, when should you start studying for finals, right? So what are we talking? Now. Now? So like when we study for finals, we all say, yeah, study day one. Study throughout the course of the year, and then you won't have to cram. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Nobody expects you to do that. I don't expect you to do that. But try not to think of this as finals. I think that now, the answer being the day you're elected, is uniquely important in this case. Okay, I'm not that stringent. You can do it the next day. You can celebrate, and then you can get to work the next day planning your next transition. So why is that? Why is your election day the day you need to think about losing your job? I want you to think about being an officer as being one in a very long line of officers. Not just taking the job from somebody and eventually giving it to somebody, but you're not just getting the information and the wisdom from your predecessor. You're getting it from your predecessor and all their predecessors. Likewise, your successor is going to get a transition from you, your predecessor, and their predecessors. So maintaining that long line and that cohesiveness is really, really important. So let's talk about what that should look like. You're just elected. What should you do? You should write down a list of questions, things you want to know. Collect your thoughts. But also write down what you think you already know. That seems pretty counterintuitive, but it's going to help give you a full picture. It's also going to allow you to be proven wrong. If you think you know how to handle finances and then you ask and they're actually suggesting something completely different, that's really important. But also, this is going to be a really important document to save a year or two down the road when you have to transition again. Because you'll want this as a reference. What was it like to not know what you were doing? What was it like to not know what you were getting into? So that way you can answer these questions for the next person if they don't know what questions to ask. And then the more obvious thing is meet with your predecessor and get everything they have. Get all the documents, all the records you can, especially financial records. Every quote, receipt, invoice. It's not uncommon for financial issues to come up with old accounts or old bills after your officers have left. So make sure you have all the paperwork you can. Contacts, obviously, any email accounts, get their passwords for any accounts that your organization shares. And learn about their first transition. Also keep in mind that when you're newly elected, you may not actually take over the organization for a few weeks or for a few months, but you're in charge of the transition. The outgoing officer is likely graduating or might have just lost an election, possibly to you. They may be moving on to a different office. So they aren't as motivated as you are to have a good transition. So don't be afraid to be rude. Don't be afraid to, I need this from you now. Finals are coming up. Most important part is getting this all done before finals start to make things crazy. And then there's several different kinds of transition meetings you can have. One-on-one time is very valuable because you get the most honest conversations about that office and the most honest anecdotes. Group transitions are also important because you want a wide array of inputs, a wide array of points of view. And if you're going to have a large group, make sure you have some money set aside. Possibly even schedule this before the elections happen so everybody knows whatever happens, we're all meeting this day and we're having pizza. Okay? And then do both formal and informal transitions. Formal, go through the documents, but be informal. Go over coffee. If you're of age, have a beer, or go over dinner. And really get out what it was like to be an officer. One of the biggest challenges when you're first elected is starting to develop an intuition. You just want to collect as many stories as you possibly can. What decisions they made and why did they make them. Even if you think the outgoing officer didn't do a very good job, you want to understand why they made the decisions they made so that you can make the most informed decisions in the future. Okay, so there's your first transition. This was on a Mac. This is supposed to be a GIF of Biden just like, bragging, yeah, I won. So be awesome. You're an officer now. I'd say for the first semester, you don't have to think about transitions too much. Just save everything you can. But you're an officer. That's great. What did you do over the course of the year? Again, I'd like to think that you're very organized and you're keeping everything in nice files and you're taking notes about what goes right. But at the very least, just don't throw anything away. Maybe they can be organized later. Maybe even the next person can organize things if you're not very organized. Don't throw any financial information away, and don't rely on your memory. I'm a biochemist, so I keep a lab notebook because I don't remember the details of my experiment I did 3 days ago. So I have to take notes on that. You're not going to remember the details of an event several months from then, let alone several years from then if you hold the office for several years. So taking notes is a good idea. And also taking notes along with all these documents. What receipt was that? What did that refer to? This is a big challenge. Really, it's more of a challenge for the organization, not just in transitions, but just in general. Where do you store your crap? You have t-shirts, you have books, you have files, and I don't think it's a good idea to store them in a dorm room. They tend to get lost, broken, and people can't access them very easily. So you'll have to be creative. Not every university has a good facility for this. Maybe there's a staff office or your advisor's office or a locker you can rent. But just keep this in mind. And then what sort of transition materials should you prepare? I'm a fan of having a hard copy transition binder, which will have a lot of paper materials. You should invest in buying an external hard drive so that you can transfer pictures and electronic documents, maybe even multiple of these if you're worried about one getting broken and you lose years worth of information. Format it as MS-DOS so that you can read it on Mac and Windows. You can also do that with a Dropbox account or a cloud account if you want to have a backup and you don't have too much data to store. So these are all the hard copy things you should have in your transition binder. I want to talk about the letter to your successor because I think that's one of the most fun parts. This is the letter I wrote when I was an undergrad, when I started Elmhurst College SSA. Oops, here we are. I made it sincere. It was a vision for the organization, some advice, some things they can expect moving forward. If you want to make it funny, if you want to make it short, if you want to write a poem, that's all fine. What's cool about this is that this will be read by officers, presidents, years from now. And this will be a lasting impression. This is sort of your fingerprint on the organization, your impression of the office. And it is so inspiring to read old letters like this. When I was in student government, we had this, and I was reading letters from decades ago, and it was amazing. So, what's that?
You didn't date it.
I dated it in writing. This is my signature, but this is just from PDF. And make sure you save these electronically as well. Transition binders get lost. So what else should you include? I think there's two kinds of sections. One that has some policies for student government, where you can get money, how to PR an event, some history, your constitution. This is a how-to, a group running guide that's specific to your university. And this is the kind of thing that once you invest in it, all you have to do is just add little tidbits, just update it. This is something that you should all have in your organizations. And then each year, each officer should add things that happened over the year. New contacts you made and maintained, old PR and how the event went, all financial information, of course, and I'll talk about pictures in a second, newspaper articles and blog posts. Make sure you print off anything that's online, because if you just link to it, it might disappear in the future. Pictures. Make sure you download them from Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter is not a transition, unfortunately. So make sure you download the highest resolution files you can, save them on the external hard drive, and back that up as well. These are really critical to PRing in the future and to getting a sense of what the group was like years ago. Okay, so you were an officer, you prepared all this material, now you have to transition to your successor. If you're reelected, nothing changes. You still pretend that you weren't reelected. Collect all of your information, get organized from the year before, and because I was president for 2.5 years and I didn't do this, it was horrible trying to remember what happened 2 years ago. So try and pretend like you're transitioning to yourself. I said before that the person being transitioned to is in charge. If it's in the best of interest of your organization that they be in charge. So if they're not quite interested, if they don't think it's important, show them this video. Hi, future audience. And show them this video and tell them that they need to take charge. This is really, really important. Also look back at those notes that I told you to save of what were your questions and what did you think you knew, and use that to inform your last transition to your successor. And I talked about maintaining friends of the organization, maintaining your contacts. It's not enough just to tell them, hey, go to them if you need a problem, or avoid them. You actually have to go and introduce them. If there's somebody that's really involved with the organization, have a sit-down meeting with you and your successor. If it's just some people that know the organization and are friendly, have a walk by, maybe sit down for coffee or lunch or something. These are really important in maintaining those relationships. Okay, lots of to-do lists. I apologize. These will be less to-do lists. As August said yesterday, this is about starting conversations, not necessarily finishing them. So I'm going to start some conversations about elections. And these are just going to be some of my pieces of advice. There's some controversy and some different ideas about how democratic SSA chapters should be. As Winston Churchill said, it's been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. I agree with that statement, and that I believe that SSA chapters should be as democratic as possible, as horizontal as possible, while still electing leadership. So we'll talk about a few things. Who do you get to run for these offices? What should you have in the Constitution? And how are you actually going to run these elections? So I would say about winter break, about halfway through your term, you should have an idea of what members would make good officers, what members are really committed, what members have high energy, what members show leadership skills. It's likely, for a lot of your organizations, you'll have heir parents. that may already be officers, that may already be positioning themselves and declaring, yeah, I'm going to run for this, or I'll be president next year. You should encourage that ambition, and you should give them opportunities for leadership. But don't just look at the obvious characters. There may be somebody, waiting in the wings, just needs the suggestion. Maybe a young freshman or sophomore that hadn't even considered running for office, but that you think has something really important to offer. They don't have to be the extroverts. They don't have to be the ones that are really ambitious. What I think is important that you not do is give the image that you're picking a successor, or have the image that you're discouraging somebody from holding office. There may be somebody who's ambitious who you think would be horrible for the position. Just no, anybody but that person. But if they come to you and ask about your position and saying they want to run, give them all the attention you'd give anybody else. Because your job is not to pick the next guy, but to make sure that your voters are going to have a good choice, and also make sure that whoever's elected, they're in the best position to succeed for the organization's sake. So about the Constitution, I probably don't have to tell most of you that student politics can be filled with a little bit of drama and dirty politics sometimes. Sometimes it runs smoothly, sometimes it doesn't. I think the larger the organization, sometimes you'll probably all have student politics stories. I certainly do. Sometimes it runs fine. But imagine all these problems that could happen. Who gets to vote? What if Crew shows up with 100 people at your election? Is there a requirement to vote? Are you taking tabs of who shows up at meetings? What if nobody runs for a position? Nobody wants to run. What if too many people run? What if 20 people show up to your election and 15 of them are running for president? Are you going to have a primary? Are you going to have some requirements for how many meetings you have to have been to? Are you going to require a declaration that they are secular? What if you're at an SSA where most of the people that show up at meetings and our dedicated members are actually theists? Do they get to vote? These are all important ideological discussions. And the problem is, when all these disaster scenarios happen, they have to be managed by a constitution and bylaws that was written before the drama happens. This only works if you anticipate the problems. So, my task for you: spend an inordinate amount of time combing through monotonous legal rambling and painstakingly evaluate election procedures that won't greatly benefit you until long after you've graduated. It's sexy work. I love legal language. I love going through the Constitution and, that'd be cool making this process. When we had to decide, who counts the votes? We said, so it'll be the youngest member, the least involved, who, if there's a tie, it's the shortest person. It's just to make some arbitrary, fair standing of who counts the votes. And go through this and consider every possible problem and write out a scenario that'll do it. And if most of you are thinking, my organization's small, I don't want to have to deal with all that, we usually don't have any drama. If there's anybody who's a fan of Robert's Rules of Order, I don't know if any of you actually run your meetings on Robert's Rules of Order, just suspend the bylaws. The rules will be there if you need them, but if you can get a majority vote that says, let's just do it the way we want to, we're a small organization, do that and you're done. And you can plan your election however you want. But the rules will be there if it seems like there is something dramatic happening. So election day, I think most of you, I think it's pretty intuitive how to run an election. But I'll just go through how I would run it if I was in your organization. I think elections should be held about 3 to 5 weeks before finals. You don't want to cut off the last officer's term too much, but you do want to give plenty of time for that transition before finals start to kick in. And this is up to you. It sort of depends on how crazy the finals weeks get, how many projects people have, and you can talk about this in the organization. But usually this is spelled out in the Constitution. Nominations, there's a diverse way of doing that. I like having really open nominations and doing them by email so that people can accept or turn down nominations by email. It's all private. So whoever's running the elections, if it's the president, collect nominations, ask do you accept, and then send out maybe a list of candidates and even bios so that people have time to peruse that on their own time. Come election day, some people elect parties with platforms. Some people elect one office at a time. I believe that a diverse, highly qualified group of officers is best. Sometimes people like a group of officers that know each other very well, work together very well, and represent the same kind of ideology. I think in a mixed group, it's great to have multiple representatives. So I like the idea of running for president, count the votes, announce who the president is. Then if you didn't win president, you can run for vice president, and down the line, however many officers you have. And then once people have given a chance to introduce themselves, the candidates, And not every group does this, but I like the idea of having them leave the room and having a private discussion among the people that are going to be voting. You know, what are these candidates like? Endorsements, if you'd like. A lot of the people that are voting don't know the people very well. So give the chance for critics and advocates to have their say and really educate the rest of the people. Yeah, there could be a lot of gossip here, but if you don't have enough advocates for you, how are you going to develop advocates as an officer? And then voting by paper ballot and keeping it as secret as possible, I think is important so that you can move past the drama of any election and move forward with the business of your organization. So with that, please feel free to contact me at any time, email, Facebook, a brand new Twitter handle for the chaplaincy, and I'd love to take your questions and have some discussions. Yes? Please, thank you.
A lot of people are elected into a higher position after being an officer
Yes.
for a year. What's your advice on dealing with people who are reluctant to give up their tasks from the previous position?
That's a very good, so just in case the sound doesn't pick it up, question was about people that don't want to give up their tasks from an old officership once they're a new officer. I think that exec boards and groups of officers really define their own roles in many ways. So sort of the most outlined ones is treasurer. Treasurer deals with anything financial, but president, vice president, secretary, and whatever other PR officers you have, generally it depends on your personality what sorts of tasks you take. So I feel like if you're the president or if you're the treasurer, you have some more defined roles, but if you are really good at doing what you were doing before, I think they can keep doing it most of the time. Now if there's something that clearly there's some boundaries being crossed and clearly this is somebody's job and they're trying to infringe on that, that's the president's job to step in and say that needs to not happen. And if it's the president that's the problem, the rest of the officers need to come together on that.
This is kind of a similar question, but for 2 years I was the president of our SSA, and I'm one of the founders of it, but I didn't run again for president.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be next year's vice president. Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific recommendations for someone who's kind of like in that position where they actually step down in the chain of command, if you will?
Well, it sort of depends on what your goal in doing that. I assume it probably time constraints is why most people would do that. Oh, sorry, the question was about somebody who has run for president and then runs for a lower office. I did that when I started the University of Chicago Secular Student Alliance, in that I started the organization and I wanted undergrads to have it because I was a grad student, and so I stepped back. But there's a clear power dynamic. I went, anybody stepping back and anybody who's a clear advisor needs to go out of their way to not try and take power, not step over the person that's president, because there's always going to be that perception. Often the members had a year of seeing this person as president, and now seeing them as an underling or whatever is a little weird. So even going out of your way, there can still be tension. It's a very difficult dynamic. So making sure you have a close relationship and lots of communication with the president is very important.
Cool.
Yes?
So I have a question about, you brought it up that there's this debate going on between appointments and elections. I do know that there's a few student groups out there that are somewhat successful in the application process, and basically they run the succession planning goes a lot like how a business would. You
Yep.
apply for a position, and I know there's success in there. I guess my question is, why are we so opposed to this? I guess maybe I show my colors. Why are we so opposed to this? Especially if our voting block can sometimes be 6 people, and that seems somewhat small, a very small end that can be swayed by one person, feeling one way, or uninformed voters, where if you have someone appointing, you can maintain. There was a certain points in your talk about, like, this actually can be solved if there was an appointment process. You can include diversity in your
Well, so you said that it's been, so this was about success happening in organizations that have more of a handover power rather than an election system, more like a business. So you said that it was successful. I'd say successful according to whom and who gets to choose. So it certainly could be, even everyone could be happy with that situation. They aren't necessarily as prepared, though, if there is a conflict between the person that was chosen and the person or the ideology that would be more elected, is more owned by the members of the organization. So it's not uncommon for a student organization, elected or not, to have a big schism that might even split the organization in two, where they have people that want to be more activist or more accommodationalist. And you know, those schisms can be survived a little bit easier if it's looked at, I think, as that the executives were elected and were represented and are accountable. I think it's easier to keep diverse groups together if that's the case. There's also just the value of free thinking and the value of democracy, I think, in and of itself. It's a complicated discussion, and we're done, but thank you very much. Yeah, it's worth having.